My name is Matthew Engle, and I guess I would just say my job title is mathematics instructor. I work at a small school, small high school, so I'm only um, we have like 1.5 math teachers. I'm the only one that's a degreed math, teacher. So you could call me the department chair, but I don't really feel like it's quite relevant because we don't even really have much of a department past me. I guess I would have spent 12 years of my life teaching total after this year's over. I generally make a point to get in before classes start. I've been lucky the last few years because my classes don't start till late morning, and I don't know, I've just kind of like that. So I have the morning to plan because I feel like I'm more productive in the morning, but that's not true every year. So generally I spend my free periods, especially morning free periods, lesson planning, getting ready for the week, and I don't know, miscellaneous things, sometimes grading. So things that I need my alone time to do because kids are in classes. Then you have your classes, and then between classes or after classes or whatever, when kids become more free, you're going to get more kids that come in and ask questions and need help in that business. And I don't know, it's kind of very flexible. So outside of your actual periods where you're physically with the students, it very much depends, but I would generalize it and say mornings are usually spent actually getting my work done I need to do for my classes, and then the afternoon is usually less productive because of kids in and out and all this stuff and whatnot. But then I work at a boarding school that has us have extra responsibilities on top of it, which is not very typical even amongst private schools anymore. So, but that means sometimes in the evenings I have school responsibilities, and I think every 5 weeks or so on the weekends there's responsibilities for supervision for kids and stuff. And then sometimes at night and in the evenings, there's stuff to do. If I need to get a test back to students and get it corrected, then sometimes I have to end up doing that after I go home from work. So I think a lot of people realize and know that teaching is one of these jobs that you're often taking your work home with you, and it's difficult because you can't just leave your work at work. That's something I don't have that much experience with because this is my main career I've had aside from jobs when I was a kid kind of thing. And so sometimes I wonder though, I don't know that it's going to be a very sustainable thing. I think probably later in my career, I'll end up, even if it's in the educational space, doing something that's um, more 9 to 5, I guess you could say, or whatever. Yeah, so the main path is if you're actually doing this and you haven't gone through school, I guess already, you'd get your undergraduate degree in the specific subject area. So I have my BA in mathematics, and I chose a BA just as a side note because I enjoy the humanities and that side of things, and so I wanted more of that in my degree. Um, but anyway, yeah, you get your degree in the subject area, and then you get a teaching credential on top of that. Sometimes there are places that have a major in high school or secondary education, but usually it's just almost like a minor you get by taking the courses you need to get a certification to teach. However, people who may already have a degree in something else, they've already gone through undergraduate elsewhere. There are a lot of master's programs. So for example, in mathematics, there are master's programs in mathematics education. So regardless, whatever degree you have as your undergraduate degree, so long as it's a 4-year degree, you can enroll in a master's program to do teaching secondary mathematics, which is kind of interesting because I think a lot of countries, I've looked into this a bit, don't have that path, like, because my personal opinion is that our country, I mean, we're wanting of teachers. If you're like, yeah, I want to be a teacher, there's states that will take you without you even getting a new degree and just start you and let you work while you work on it or help you work on it or whatever. So not only are we wanting for teachers, but I think a lot of people realize that our culture doesn't really value teachers, I think, as much as, and a lot of people do, or they pay lip service to it. But culturally speaking, I don't think we value them as much as other cultures do. And it shows. It's not hard to become a teacher. It's actually quite easy. The expectations aren't incredibly high. And a lot of it's because, I don't know, like I said, we're wanting a lot for teachers, but not that many teachers are going into that. And I used to live in China, for example, which night and day difference as far as that goes, because you have parents come in and be like, what do I, what do I need to do? What's my student doing? Everything's like the student's job to learn. Everything, they're so focused on, I need to do my job. That's when learning is going to happen. And it has its own flaws in some ways, but ours is like, what's wrong with the teacher? Not like, you know what I mean? A student could be having issues with something that they probably need to work on. And the automatic thing is, how can I get out of this? Or how can I get my student out of this? Instead of just like asking the question, what do I need to be doing as a learner, So I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but the career paths are pretty open, I think, to become a teacher. Whether anything K to 12, I would say, is pretty open. There's a lot of pathways, whether you're a new student at college or university, or you've already got your degree. I'm not going to say it's easy necessarily, but it's very accessible. There wasn't any appeal, I'll be honest. Being a teacher and being a math major, actually, both of those things, if you had told me like when I graduated from high school, like when I started college, that I was going to end up doing that, I would have probably just laughed in your face. Teachers, like I've already said, teachers aren't really respected in our culture, overall. The pay is not great, although it's getting better, I think, now. Uh, the hours, like I already said about taking your work home with you, all that stuff, right? If you really, this is the thing, and I'm surprised how many teachers are teachers that don't really like being teachers. They're like, I'll just be a teacher. Why the heck would you want to do that? What a horrible job to just like do because you don't know what to do. And I can't believe how many people still do that. Teaching something you need to have a passion for, or it's the worst. And it's bad for the students, man. That's so horrible to have somebody who doesn't actually want to be doing that, who's teaching kids. So, I mean, that aside, for me, I did not want to do that. And then I was kind of an undecided point in my life when I was in university, and I went through a program that my university had for letting you volunteer overseas. There are various jobs available, but probably the majority of them involve teaching. And I decided, okay, yeah, I'll go overseas and teach for a year. And I just enjoyed my experience a lot. And I got a lot of positive feedback from the students I taught, and it planted that seed like, oh, I think I really like this, and I might want to do this longer. And some of my students, like I think 3 of them had come to me at the end of the year and told me that, wow, they just really enjoyed math that year and they've never liked it before that at all. And that kind of put that in my head about math, because I was trying to decide subject area or whatever. And so I decided to do a math major, which is really funny because even when I started that, I wasn't like super keen on it. I would say I never hated math, but like it was not something that I related to well, because I was really into the humanities. I loved English class in high school, anywhere where I had a creative outlet. But I've since kind of applied a lot of that creativity and thinking like that to the subject area of mathematics. And I've actually realized that math actually is, a lot of people think of it as like this pure science, but math is equally art and humanities as it is science. Actually, I think it's the subject that really bridges the gap between the two, to be honest. So anyway, I've kind of since grown into that, but it's interesting that I had this kind of transformative experience volunteering and then decided to go with that and see how it ended up. And I ended up really enjoying it. And I guess here I am now. Yeah, I have kind of a wide variety. Like obviously like I just said, my volunteer year is what maybe decided to go into the career path. And that's kind of a broader thing. Once I graduated from university, I got recruited and I ended up moving to an international school in China for 2 years. So I was teaching math at an English speaking international school. And so while I was there, I've always loved humanities, especially languages, and I spent a lot of my free time studying Mandarin when I was there. And I've really spent some good time around the local people and got to know the culture pretty well. So I would say that's been a really helpful thing. So that's one thing, because
we have a lot of students coming from China. That's like the highest number of international students that schools are getting in the US these days, right? So that's been super helpful. And especially here, because we have quite a large percentage of students here. So I'm also helping direct the international kind of students as far as like activities and relations and stuff like that, not like academics or anything per se, because we have a kind of a main person who directs that. But so that's been something that's played into my job, but also helps me relate to them in class and stuff like that. I would say there's so many instances where I've been able to connect on a deeper level with those Chinese students because of that experience. And I think it's given me broader perspective to help my students realize more about what they should get out of their education and stuff like that, compared to if I had not spent time overseas, let's say. My last job that I held prior to this, I worked at another boarding school in the same system as the one I'm at now. And that was my first couple of years completely in full-time in an American, school. And I would still consider myself pretty new. I'd spent 2 years in China, and then I moved to the school in Montana. And looking back on that, it's so funny how much you cringe at like things that you used to believe or used to do, when you were younger and stuff like that. And I look at that, but a lot of those formative years, I had really good mentor teachers at that school. And so some things, I definitely had my mind changed on like beliefs that I used to think about pedagogy and things like that, from working with some of the teachers there that were experienced and really high quality teachers. And yeah, so I say a lot of how my educational practice has developed in my current position was informed by that last position prior to this in some of those ways. Um, and then I guess just overall, just more years of teaching in general, the years I had under my belt prior to coming to this current position just gave me some maturity, I guess, in those ways. I'm also the type of person I'm very resourceful, I guess I would say. And I'm not okay with just like kind of going through the motions as is. And so I've spent a lot of time learning the material I teach really well. Because even though my degree is in mathematics, there's probably like half of the high school curriculum that I didn't really, you know, use in my undergraduate stuff. So I had to relearn a lot of content again. And it would have been really easy to just open a textbook and follow along, step by step, but that's not really doing mathematics, to be honest. And I spent a lot of time learning and researching things myself. And again, that's kind of led into where I'm at too. Another thing that could answer this question is, even though this isn't like job experience per se, I got, and it was through a strike of fate, I guess I would say, or fate or luck, or I don't know. I guess it's just networking. I think it's because I've reached out, but I met somebody online through trying to learn different things, who got me a recommendation for this program that's, I don't know, it's probably one of the top math teacher programs. Maybe there's two, I think, that are really high and selective. And I was fortunate enough one summer to get selected for this 3-week long, really intensive math teacher program. It's called the Park City Math Institute, and it's their teacher leadership program. And that was probably the single most transformative experience that I've had. And I actually went to that 2 summers in a row. And essentially that basically it has you at least 8 hours a day doing math together in groups, and then spending a lot of time doing intensive discussion on pedagogy and things like that, and then actually designing professional development for other teachers. That's kind of what you spend your afternoon doing. And then there's optional things in the afternoons and evenings to attend that are math related as well. And it's actually part of a broader program that mathematicians come from all over the world. It's a different topic every summer. So depending on what your research area is, you may come in and collaborate. So it's like this big collaborative, I don't know, camp. I don't know, I'd quite call it a camp, but a collaborative space for 3 weeks that's just math the whole time. And the teachers have their space. There's an undergraduate program, and there's like a research level program and stuff. And so you're with all these people the whole time. And that was probably the most, yeah, and by far the most transformative experience that I had. And that was at the beginning of my time at this current position. So kind of those probably are the main things that stick out to me that led to where I'm at right now. Yeah, so I guess I have broad ones. Is it fine with you that I also speak to some that I wouldn't say are absolutely essential, but make me who I am as a teacher too? Because that's something that I was kind of thinking about when I was mulling this question over in my head. Is that all right? So I guess overall, if I want to say absolutely necessary, and that doesn't mean every teacher has these, right? And it doesn't even mean I've always had these at every moment of every day, and I've also grown in these, right? I think one of the number one things I was just talking about today with somebody, especially amongst, going like with the COVID-19 business happening right now, uh, I think it's helped me realize even during a regular school year how important this is. But I think number one for me is compassion and understanding. Um, Boy, it really, really helps to be able to empathize with people. It helps to put yourself in somebody's shoes. You have no idea what goes on in kids' lives, what's made them who they are at the point you see them in your classroom, right? And it's really easy to jump to conclusions or assume whatever it is, like a kid's cheating, right? Like it's really easy to just get angry about that and get them in trouble. But what's much more productive is trying to find the root of that and prevent it from happening again in a way that makes them feel loved and cared for and understood. So, and that's not my number one easiest thing. I've really had to grow in that area. I'm a pretty no nonsense, pull yourself up by your bootstraps type person originally, but I'd say I've really, really grown in that area a lot. And I've had to. I don't think I would have lasted because I'm also very intentional. So that might be the next thing I would say. I think intentionality is absolutely necessary. And again, not everyone has this. In fact, I think far too few teachers do have intentionality, as one of their main goals. But you really need to be intentional about learning. There's so many learning theories out there, and you should do things this way or this way, right? There's so many differing opinions on things. And the fact is, any given class you get, you need to probably approach in different ways. You might have your main beliefs that you operate upon, I guess, every single year or with every single class you teach, but you really need to be flexible. And some things that have proven to work will work for some groups, but some things that are proven to work won't necessarily work for every group. And you have to just have that. But I would say the one word that summarizes all that would be, like I said, intentionality. Because if you're intentional with what you do, then that flexibility will come with it because you're going to be aware of the needs of your students. So intentionality and awareness. So I guess what I say, compassion, intentionality, and awareness. And I think a lot of the other, I think I would leave it at that, short and sweet. Those kind of two main concepts as far as what I would really put out there and say, because if you have those two things, they're pretty broad reaching things. A lot of stuff will come with it. A lot of people might think of a teacher as being super organized, for example. Well, that ain't me naturally. Again, I've gotten much better at that, especially because I've realized how many students, but this goes back to intentionality. I've realized, wait a minute, the way this group of students thinks is like very, I don't know how to say it exactly, but very detail oriented. Like they need every little thing spelled out for them. And my initial reaction to that is, you don't need that. Just, I think I'm a very big picture type person, but so I don't relate to a person who is not a very big picture and they need all these spelled out and they can't just see like the overall thing. Why do I need to tell you all these details? You can fill those in yourself. That's what I think naturally at first, but then you realize, oh, this kid needs more organization. So one example for this for me is I used to just write homework assignments on the board day by day and just erase them each day for the next day's work or whatever. But once that's erased, if a kid didn't write it down or whatever, it's like, oh, they might have lost it. Some of the detailed oriented kids probably were very good about writing that down and stuff, but I realized I started making a pre-made assignment list that went every time we got to a new unit, I would give it to the students. I'd release that to students so they had those ahead of time, and it also said the main like learning goals for that unit and stuff like that on it. And that's just one example of something that kids who are like me may not necessarily need that, right? Because they might kind of gather that information along the way. They're okay taking things as they come, because I'm kind of like that. But kids who are not like me, it really benefited them for me to give this out, right? So that's one of those things that, like, even though I'm not an organized person, I think I've become organized and built organization into my classroom for those who need it, because I've been intentional about listening or looking out for things that particular students need. And again, I'm not going to claim I'm perfect on any of these fronts, but like, I try to keep an eye out for that stuff and what they need in the different types of learners and all that kind of stuff, and then provide things to help accommodate those things, I suppose. For me personally, things that I think that really contribute to me being the teacher that I am, and I would consider myself a pretty strong teacher, but again, it's not because of any inherent thing. Again, I'm going to go back to, I've really grown in my compassion, and I'm very intentional. Those two things I already said, right? That's what I think makes me strong at what I do, and anybody could do that if they had those two things really worked on a lot, right? But for me, some other characteristics I think really go with me. Well, passion, I guess that could go in my list. Passion, if you're not passionate about what you do, but again, that kind of feeds it with intentionality. But I'm really interested in my subject. I spend time working on mathematics on my own in my free time. I really like it, and I really like sharing that love of it with students, and that really helps them. And even if a kid doesn't come out loving math out of my classroom, my goal at least is still to have them get an appreciation for it and a respect for it that they may not have had, even if they still don't really like it that much, because that's fine. Not everyone's going to like anything, right? I'm very creative, and I mentioned that before. You know, like I said, my favorite subjects were more on the humanities, especially like English and stuff where I could be creative and express myself. So I think that gives a nice, refreshing look to math for kids, because they see it as very black and white and cut and dry. And as I said, it's actually not really. Actual mathematics is not that. School mathematics is more black and white, cut and dry often, which has its merit because part of what they're learning is following through with a logical sequence of reasoning and stuff like that, which is totally fine. But it is nice that they can see another side to math when they have me as a teacher. On top of that, I've said this too, but I'm also very resourceful. I have so many resources, and I know a lot of teachers. It surprises me, but I guess it's just because it's a strength of mine that maybe other people don't have. But it surprises me how many teachers aren't aware of the resources that are available for teaching math when I talk to a lot of teachers. And I guess it's just because I spend a lot of time looking out for resources, and I really have found a lot of stuff that's been very helpful to me, whether it's a different approach to take when teaching something, or just personal learning of something and seeing things in new ways, or whatever it is. I think being tactful is helpful. I'm in the middle ground on that. I guess you could also say it a different way. Like, usually I'm not afraid to say something if it needs to be said most of the time, but I'm also pretty good at not, there's some time where it's worth speaking up and arguing with somebody about something. And sometimes it's like, I'm not going to get anywhere, so it's not worth me saying anything in the first place. And you run into a lot of differences of opinion with people, whether it's parents or colleagues or students themselves or whoever, in the education space. And so it's good to have that. It varies widely with teacher by teacher, because you have some teachers, and your typical thing is going to be older teachers are probably going to use less technology and stuff like that, right? They're going to be more into the older using whiteboards, blah, blah, blah. But I think every teacher is a mixture. So I think it depends on what you want to use. The typical things, like there's a lot of really good web apps for learning and stuff that are out there right now that are just really good, or phone apps for student learning. So I really do value using technology, but I don't have nearly the like real high tech setup that a lot of teachers do, because it's just not my style, I guess. But I do value that my school we're not one-to-one, but we do have carts available. So we have iPads that students can use. And there's a lot of good online activities where I can kind of proctor an activity from my computer while they're all live working on it and give feedback and stuff. Like, there's one particular website that I use that just has really good math activities for learning. And I have a projector, which is pretty typical. I have a document camera, which allows me to write. It's like a document camera is pretty much a new version of an overhead projector, right? but you can write on a physical piece of paper and the camera projects onto your projector what you're writing. So that helps illustrate things to kids sometimes, but I just like using an old-fashioned whiteboard often. That's one of my favorite tools. I think math, so much of math, especially in the high school curriculum, is best done with still paper and pencil. Aside from maybe some calculations you do or some tedium that you can use technology to help you and not doing it by hand. I think a lot of teachers are still stuck though in that. A lot of teachers are still stuck in, no, you need to do everything by hand because, and I don't think they ever have a good reason to follow that because, but technology is very helpful, but yeah, when it boils down to it, I think for me, having kids physically writing things is good. I've put a lot of whiteboard space around my walls. I think having kids up, there's a researcher actually that I really look up to, based out of Vancouver, Canada, and his name is Peter Liljedahl, kind of hard to say, but he has some amazing research on the learning gains that happen when students are simply standing and working on a vertical, what he calls a vertical non-permanent surface. So it could be a blackboard or a whiteboard or even like a throwaway version of one of those things. But if students are up in groups, tackling problems together, standing, and have something that's easily erasable right away, not like pencil on paper, because then it takes more to erase it. It's more permanent. And so that's something in my classroom I value a lot, is the use of whiteboard space, and a lot of just web stuff available, YouTube, things like that. Having that access is really helpful for me. But every teacher has their own flavor mixture. How much technology is used, how much hand stuff is used, this, that. I think it depends. Not require traveling. My job. Plenty of education jobs do if you're working more at the district level or whatever that is. But I do travel because I make a point to go to the math teacher convention every year, although this year it's virtual and I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm sick of virtual stuff. But I try. We're lucky at my school to have a donor who donates specifically for teachers to go to stuff like that, because I'm not like at a district that has like an allotment. I work at a private school, so it's like there's not an allotment that you could apply for to do it or whatever. So I've been lucky on that, and yeah, most every year it's usually in the spring. I go to this big teaching convention, and it's cool because I get to see some of my friends from that summer program that I mentioned earlier. And these days, that's pretty much the only time I actually get to see those people. And that's been really good because, again, that professional development is very invaluable to me. Seeing how other people do things, that when you go to those conventions, it ranges from pedagogy, right? Teaching practice, like focused on a specific thing, to maybe just doing math together or whatever. There's all sorts of things. Or to like right now, a big issue is there's a lot of, there's a big gender gap in math education, math and science in general. There's a lot of equity issues with race and things like that. And that's, a big topic of conversation right now in the math teaching space. So that's another example of things that you might do there. But yeah, anyway, not much travel unless you go out of your way to do the traveling. Really, my only experience with public is my student teaching. So right before I graduated college, but I've had plenty of friends who have taught or are teaching in the public system. I've looked into it a lot. I'm potentially even interested in doing that myself, like in the future, So anyway, boy, it's funny because even within those, there's a lot of very variation. I guess I might generalize a little bit, so you can't necessarily quote me entirely on the generalization here first, but generally speaking, a private school has a little bit more freedom and flexibility in what you do in your classroom, but a lot of private schools pay less than public schools, although I think in a lot of people's heads, private schools might pay more. Maybe that's true, but it really depends on the private school. Not every private school is a hoity-toity private school that pays people a lot of money, right? And I would say most private schools actually are not. My personal private school is, a religious affiliated private school, and it's, we take a wide range of students. There's a lot of students that we help financially because their parents want them to have this type of education, but they might not be able to fully afford it. So we have like a work program for students to help work off their tuition. And there's, there's stuff like that. So I do not get paid very well. And I think I would also say most private schools don't get paid super well. So that's kind of a downside. But again, for me, I value the freedom I have in my job to make decisions I want to make and do what I want to do without having too much, breathing down my neck or whatever, dictation of how to do things. And most public school districts, but yet again, it really depends on the district, I think, are a little bit more rigid, in spelling out how to do things, what pace to go, and exactly what topics that you're supposed to teach, and a lot of those things. But again, there's variation. There's some districts that are really spelling it out to the point where there's not much professionalism left, I'll be honest. And if you're at a good public school district, they're going to have a little bit less of that and give you that freedom that you should have as a professional to make decisions year by year and whatnot. So those are probably the broad things that come to mind, I guess, if you compare them. But I don't know, private schools often work you a little bit harder, I would say, for that less money. And it's nice that public schools have, pretty strict measures in place to make sure that you're not getting burnt out, or make sure you actually have a life. I think that's going to be a little more common at a public school than it would be at a private school, but again, it totally depends on where. I mean, depending on what private or public school, you might have a higher or a lower student teacher ratio. Private schools probably tend to have a better ratio of student teachers, less students per teacher, but or fewer. But it also depends, if you're in a small school that's a public school, you may have a pretty low thing. So it all depends. That'd be nice. I could go take my degree and be a computer scientist and make 3 times as much as I make, probably. We're in demand, though. That's almost always a truth. If you're a math teacher, you're going to be in demand, and you're probably going to be able to get a job most anywhere you want to work. So even though the pay is not any better for a math teacher, at least jobs are available most of the time. Okay, I think a lot of people think teaching is pretty easy. I've run into that actually quite a bit, more than I would have guessed, actually. And that like anyone can just go in and like tell kids how to do things, but that's just laughable now. Like teaching is so much about understanding people, which is really not everyone's cup of tea. It's a lot of patience. There's a lot of patience needed for that. And again, I'm not a person that inherently has a lot of patience, right? It's an area I've had to grow in a lot, but understanding people is number one on that. And so I don't think a lot of people really realize the skill set a teacher needs to have to be a strong teacher. And I like I said, I think people often think you can kind of grab somebody off the street and maybe you need to give them a little bit of training, but they'll be a fine teacher, and if you look at, there's studies on lots of countries. One of the hot buzzword countries right now is Finland for their education system. And, if you research or just read about their education system, they realize that teaching is very nuanced. It's very difficult. There's so much that goes into being a good teacher as far as the skill set. And that's why it's like the hardest program to get into at their universities. They only accept, I might be mistaken, but I think it's something like 15% of applicants to their teaching programs. Whereas here, like I said, we'll take anyone we can get in most cases in our teaching programs, right? And so I think that kind of cultural, expectation about teaching is maybe the hardest thing to go against. And then in my specific subject area, I think, again, everyone kind of knows, if you say you're a math teacher, the most common response I'll get, and I'm not going to say it's overwhelmingly common, but I would still say it's the majority of people are like, ooh, math, like, ooh, I don't like math, or whatever that idea of math is. So it's hard for me. And this is what's made me potentially be interested in going back and teaching like middle school, because research has shown that middle school is most often where kids are veer off the track of feeling an identity with mathematics and enjoying it versus just absolutely hating it like a lot of kids do. Um, but by the time they come to me, at best in ninth grade, very few kids can I erase that feeling from if they've already got that feeling. Yeah, they may be like, yeah, I kind of see that, Mr. Engle. I respect it. I understand I kind of understand where you're going with this, you know, but they still don't fully internalize and embrace it or allow themselves to step in the circle because they've felt like they're not part of the group. You know, that's the traditional thought process of math. You know, teachers of old, I would say, which there's still some lingering about here, have had the idea, many of them anyway, probably most, that math is a subject that's for some people and not for other people, but that's just stupid. It's like anything. It's like reading, it's like riding a bike, it's like whatever. If you work at it, you will improve and you'll get better at it, you know? So even a kid who comes in who's not strong in math, and it's hard, I don't say every kid's good at math, right? But and this is very cliche in education, but to me, it's a not yet, you know? If you're willing to put in the time and effort and believe in yourself, and I put a lot of work into trying to help kids believe in themselves and trust in themselves, especially just to think for themselves, see, then you will get better at that. But again, the prevailing notion, which it's starting to tip, but it's still, I think the prevailing idea for people is that some are good at math and some are bad some aren't good at math at all, rather than if you put in the time and work like anything else, you can be good at it, you know? So that would be the hardest thing to go against. And I've questioned myself, like, do I want to go into some other subject area? Like a handful of times in my career because I was just so overwhelmed trying to fight that particular battle. But it has reward. Every year I have at least one student, but usually a few, who really connect with what I'm trying to do and like actually take it seriously and try to change their minds and do change their minds. And we just have a nice bond usually when that happens. And that's really nice. I guess I just get bummed out often because not as many kids as I wish do change their minds about it, you know, but that's life. I need to have the attitude of like, if I can just change one mind every year, then I am going to be happy. But I'm kind of I don't know, say perfectionist, idealist, I would say, right? So that makes me get a little bit bummed out when not everybody is like, oh yeah, I love math now. You know what I mean?
I'm a person who likes variety and I'm not a routine based person. And again, it's funny because I think a lot of stereotypical teachers anyway, you know, are like the organized step-by-step routine or, you know, blah, blah, blah. And that's not really me. And I actually really value the variety, whether that's the variety in activities I design for students to do. You know, some days there's purely work days. Some days I design a really cool, you know, activity, blah, 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 right? There's variety in what I do specifically with the kids. There's variety in my day, you know, because I have a mixture of time where I'm working by myself, which is really nice, time with the kids in class formally, and then time to spend informally one-on-one with kids who need stuff outside of class. And I do like it. I do enjoy in my school, even though it's, you know, extra work, I do enjoy being involved. To me, that's actually really helpful because when I am able to develop those relationships in that way, then you really connect better with students, especially with students who, you know, may struggle in the subject area or just maybe struggle with school in general, I guess I would say. Um, so yeah, variety maybe number one for me. I guess going with what I just said though too is just I enjoy being around people, but I enjoy being around kids. And I'll be completely honest, I think adults can be some of my least favorite people. I hate them sometimes. And I think because they're just overgrown kids who a lot of them haven't actually grown out of whatever crap they had when they were younger. And but I guess I go back to intentionality. They haven't been intentional about growing as human beings, right? So anyway, yeah, adults suck sometimes. But I like kids because I like how candid they can be. I like the fact that I'm able to try to help shape, you know, their lives in a positive way while they're still likely to be able to be molded, even though in high school it's still starting to solidify there, right? But I like that that's a capacity that I have in my job. But I take that seriously, right? Because that's another reason why I don't think just anyone should be a teacher.
unless they're really intentional about it, because you're actually having a very influential impact on the rest of students' lives, whether you mean to or not. And it's not like I've done stellar in that area. There's been plenty of really big mistakes I've made in those ways, where I know that students have probably been hurt and things like that. But I also know that I've had a lot of really more than the other good experiences where students have come out just really being better people, making, whether it's making more informed decisions as a as a person in general, whether it's being better at thinking logically, whether it's just emotionally better because they've had a positive experience with me, or anything else on that emotional side of things that has nothing to do with my subject even. I like the ability to be able to positively influence kids, and I take that very seriously. I forgot to mention that in the likes, I like having breaks. I like that I get summer off, for example. I like that I have, 2 to 3 weeks off for winter break and stuff like that. That's a really big plus. I really don't like grading. And I think actually a lot of teachers that I collaborate with anyway, we love the lesson planning and the ideation, and, because the creativity is fun, right? But when it comes down to getting down and dirty and just grading stuff, to me, I'm not a person that likes tedium. I know a lot of people who really do enjoy tedium, which I can't fathom, but that's fine. It's good that we have people that like that, right? So for me, anything that's tedious like that, I just don't really enjoy that much. Also, and I'll make myself vulnerable. I shouldn't, because I know I do my best, right? But I take it personally, or it hurts my feelings, I guess I would say. And it's not because the students did anything, right? But if I'm like, let's say I'm grading a test and a bunch of kids do bad, I just get way too hard on myself for that, instead of just being like, well, it is what it is. This happens. It's not a big deal. We just got to go back and maybe relearn some things or whatever, right? But I still like, is that's something that's hard for me to take. I think part of it's just because I pour so much of myself into what I do. And so if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, even if it's not on me, it's still, I get that feeling inside, that not in my stomach or something like that. So that's kind of one of those weird things. I know not everyone feels that way. Some people are like indifferent, although I guess the opposite would be worse, because I also know teachers who are like, every kid bombs a test and they're like, oh, you all suck. This is all your fault. They don't take it as like, oh, what can I do differently, or what should I do moving forwards? I think it's best not to pass blame, period, on yourself or on the kids or whatever, because being more objective and just saying, okay, well, what can we do moving forward is better. But I'm still not always, the best at being neutral on that, emotionally. So yeah, tedium, and that's a little hard, but it's okay. It's better now. Other things I don't enjoy. I'll be honest, I don't always enjoy, because I think it tires me out, the taking work home with you. And I'm not talking about physical work necessarily sometimes. Sometimes it is, but in my head. And I have to be very intentional at home about clearing my head out and spending some alone time by myself and trying to just not think about work while I'm at home. But especially in teaching, I know it's true in a lot of careers, or maybe it's a personal thing, maybe more than anything. But yeah, I don't enjoy how much comes home with me, whether it's physical or emotional or whatever it is. So those are probably the main things. It's funny, I was kind of mentoring a prospective math teacher the other day, who's kind of questioning if they really want to go into it because they're having some struggles with school and stuff. And one thing that we were talking about that he was saying he wishes, and I also look back and wish, is some universities do really well with this, but a lot of them, there's just not enough classroom time for prospective teachers. Like, I just wish I had opportunity to be in a classroom, in a variety of different classrooms more often. I had 2 classes that required observation hours. No, 1 class that required just observation hours. Another class that required kind of working alongside a teacher, but not teaching per se. But neither of those had an overwhelming amount of hours. I wish there was way more hours in the classroom. Before I had my student teaching, that was like all I had. And I I just wish that you were teaching during school a lot before you actually graduated. Because instead of picking out specific things I wish people told me, I would rather just say that I had had more hands-on experience teaching before actually getting out and doing it. And I wouldn't always say that's true about any profession or any hobby or anything like that necessarily. I mean, at some point, getting out and doing it is when you start your job. I know that there's an argument there, but I think there could be a better job done preparing for you for what it's really like, because some people genuinely don't really realize it and then don't end up liking it. And I don't think you really get a good enough idea of it. And then for my particular university, they did not, it's a small university, so I understand this, but I don't think they did a great job preparing us for subject specific things. I wish people had talked with me about, here's the proper way to approach, or like the math behind this or whatever, this particular topic when you're teaching, algebra 2 or something like that, right? Those are things that I would wish that I had had, instead of having to figure all that out myself. And again, there's always going to have to be an element of doing stuff for yourself, right? But I think that could be done better. Be prepared emotionally, because you're going to deal with a lot of things and you can choose to ignore them. But if you're going to be intentional, you need to face what's going on with students, and need to be able to deal with it. I wish that there'd been a push, or I wish I really knew how valuable it would be to tack on with a master teacher, I guess I'd say, in the beginning of my career. I think there's a lot of things that I learned the hard way that I probably could have avoided, at least some. I'm the type of person that often just prefers to learn the hard way in the first place, but there's at least some things I would have avoided, or taken less time to realize, if I had that. I did have this advice, but I'm going to go with it anyway. There's a teacher who's quite famous, math teacher, that I chatted with online once. And he told me, if you're really doing things right, it's going to be really difficult. So build a support group of peers, professionally and just personally, to help you not go insane. Because if you're really fighting to do things right, especially in math education, because there's a lot of people that are really sticks in the mud, I guess, about moving forward and progressing in some very important ways. And they're all research backed, a lot of the people that don't want to move forward or do things differently, they don't make decisions based on any sort of research or, like I said, intentionality. So that was really good advice. And I don't think I really followed the advice as much as I should have. I was like, no, I'll be okay. I can handle this. But it would have been good for me to really build a good base of people who are like-minded, who could give me that support and encouragement in the times I needed when I was fighting battles that I was fighting.
I would say it depends on the time of year where there's more or less work-life balance. If there's a time where I'm giving, I don't know why, but usually tests I'm giving for my classes end up in the same week. I don't know why that always happens. So those can sometimes be busier, but also the end of a term, obviously. I would say that I'm generally at work
Anywhere from 9 to 12 hours a day, but it really depends on the day. I would say it's not that frequently I'm actually at work for 12 hours, but it is fairly frequent that I have something to do for work outside of, when I go home. And that's just that might be I don't know, that might be an average, because that's just distributed differently depending on the day. It really just depends. Some weeks are just end up being a little lighter as far as the work I have to do, some a little bit more. But like I said, you have to be very careful and intentional about most of the time not bringing your work home with you. You have to do that. You're just going to get burnt out if you don't. So.
You need to visit a lot of classrooms. You need to visit various classrooms with various teachers, talk with them about that, not just see what it's like and feel what it's like, but have conversations with them about what it's like. And You have to have a passion for people if you're going to do it. And you cannot, and I know a lot of people might disagree with me on this, but I don't think you can be a super follow the rules or else based person. A lot of people are very much like that, very detailed, whatever, like by the book stuff, whatever. I think there's value in that. If you have a balance, then I mean, you can be more like that. That's fine. But I would say you have to be somebody who understands others well. And you may not, I don't know, some people may not realize if they do or not. I don't know. We can also be our own worst critics. So I'm not trying to discourage people, but if you would not enjoy, that, you just don't, you shouldn't do it. You deal with a lot of people's problems and it's very emotionally overwhelming. So, but if you're really trying to decide on that, just you need to see a lot of classrooms and talk to a lot of people. There's plenty of literature or just informal blogs, articles, and things that exist online. So just do your research to really get a feel for what it's actually like. And I'll tell you, if you have a heart for kids and you really enjoy, because I just enjoy sharing. I love learning and I love sharing. So if you have a heart for people and you love learning yourself and you like sharing, potentially strong career for you. Um, and the pros outweigh the cons for me, for sure. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean the job's easy, obviously, right? I think it really helps to talk to somebody. I haven't quite followed through with this yet because since COVID-19 hit, it's just been hard, especially with finances and stuff. But I would say talk to somebody and meet with a professional that can help you through that thinking process. For me personally, I have so many things that I have so many career paths I could follow and that I would really enjoy and I know I would do well at. And it's just because I value doing well at what I do. And I work hard, to try to do that. And I, in general, just enjoy a lot of things. I don't get bored easily. I think there's a lot of things I could do that I would really enjoy. So for me, that's overwhelming. But then I also would love to work with teachers, maybe be a consultant of some sort or be somehow do something else in the educational space, or even maybe go into something else that another completely other industry that, because there's a lot of them that actually hire teachers because we have a lot of important skills that you develop that are really useful and transferable to other industries. For my personal looking and all that business, I really would say talking to somebody who can help you think through your strengths and what's going to make you feel most fulfilled is probably like my number one thing. And be real with yourself too, you got to be honest about what it is you really want to do, what you want out of it, and don't just decide something for superficial reasons. Decide to pursue something because it's best for you, which could be financially. That's not bad or wrong per se, but it should probably also be emotionally, socially, and whatever, all those other things.